It only took 5 seconds to destroy a man's whole career. Not with a gun. Not with a fight. But with a single, silent mistake, made in front of everyone. Before we dive into this powerful story, please tell us where you are watching from in the comments section and subscribe for more interesting stories like this. The courtroom was quiet. You could hear the tick-tick-tick of the wall clock. Everyone was waiting for the judge. Some looked bored. Some looked nervous. Others whispered to each other in low voices. And then there was her, the black woman in the navy blue dress. She sat alone in the front row, calm as still water. Her back was straight. Her face looked peaceful. She didn't look scared. She didn't look worried. She just waited. Nobody really noticed her. Until Officer Rivers Halston walked in. He stormed through the doors like a lion hunting its prey. His boots stomped hard on the floor. His eyes scanned the room. His chest puffed out like a balloon full of anger. He had woken up angry. First, someone had scratched his car. Then his coffee had spilled on his uniform. And now, here in court, all he wanted was control. And there she was. A black woman sitting in the front row. Alone. Without any papers. Without a lawyer. Without permission in his eyes. Rivers' jaw tightened. He didn't ask for her name. He didn't check her badge. He didn't ask a single question. He assumed. He marched toward her fast. "You're not allowed to sit here," he barked. She turned slowly and looked up at him. Her eyes were calm, deep like a quiet ocean. "Excuse me?" she asked softly. Rivers didn't care. His face turned red. His voice got louder. "Stand up. Now." She didn't move. Rivers grabbed her arm. The room gasped. The woman stood without a word. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. But her eyes locked on his like two beams of light in the dark. "Let's go," Rivers growled, dragging her down the aisle. "Officer," a voice called out. "Wait, stop." But he didn't stop. Not until he pushed open the courtroom doors and shoved her outside. And then everything changed. She turned, gently brushing off her dress. Her face still calm. Her voice like silk. She reached into her bag and pulled out a badge. Not a small one. Not a fake one. Not a visitor's pass. A gold badge. A shiny one. She held it up slowly, right in front of Rivers' shocked eyes. "Dr. Anne Hathaway," she said. "Newly appointed chief of police." Rivers' mouth dropped open. His hand shook. He felt cold. Then hot. Then cold again. Someone behind him whispered, "He just made the biggest mistake of his life." And that was only the beginning. Anne Hathaway stood in front of the mirror, tying her navy blue scarf. Her hands were steady. Her eyes strong. But inside, her heart beat fast. Today was her first public appearance as chief of police. The first black woman to ever lead the city's police force. The first woman ever to... She had worked for 22 years. Climbed every step. Faced every insult. Passed every test. Now she stood ready. "You've earned this," she whispered to herself. "Don't let anyone shake you." She stepped outside into the morning sun, where her assistant, Kemi, waited in the car. "You ready?" Kemi asked with a smile. "As ready as I'll ever be," Anne replied. Her first appearance wasn't a parade. It wasn't a press conference. It was something quieter but more powerful, a courtroom visit. She wanted to see how justice really worked. Not from behind a desk, but with her own eyes. "No guards?" Kemi had asked earlier. "No guards," and said, "I want to sit like everyone else. I want to watch, like everyone else." And so she did. That day, she entered the courtroom early. No suit. No title on her chest. Just herself. She sat quietly in the front row, her badge hidden in her purse. Watching. Listening. Learning. And then, Officer Rivers Halston walked in, like a storm made of anger and pride. After dragging and out of the courtroom, Rivers stood frozen, watching her badge shimmer in the light. The hallway was silent. Too silent. People began pouring out of the courtroom. Some with their phones. Some whispering. Some recording. The judge himself stepped out, his white hair messy and eyes wide. "What's going on out here?" he barked. And turned to him calm. "Good morning, Your Honor." The judge squinted. Chief Hathaway? Yes, she said. I was sitting inside when your officer here grabbed me. The judge's face turned pale. Oh my God. The silence returned, thicker than before. Rivers still hadn't moved. Is this some kind of prank? He asked, his voice now shaky. Anne's eyes narrowed, not angry, but full of knowing. No prank, she said. Just a very public mistake. Back in the locker room, Rivers sat on a bench, head in his hands. The walls felt like they were closing in. What were you thinking? His partner, Dave, asked. I thought she didn't belong there, Rivers mumbled. She was the chief, man. Dave shouted. You touched the chief. Rivers clenched his fists. She didn't look like a chief. Dave stared at him. And what does a chief look like, Rivers? Rivers didn't answer. But inside, he was screaming. Not in guilt, but in panic. He was in trouble. Big trouble. By noon, the video was everywhere. And Hathaway, dragged from her seat. Composed. Silent. Rivers Halston. Red-faced. Yelling. Grabbing. And then the badge. The look on his face. The moment the world turned. The news picked it up. New police chief attacked by one of her own. Racist cop grabs black woman in court. Guess who she is? Justice in 5 seconds. The mayor called. The governor called. Even Anne's mother called from another state. Baby, her mother said softly, are you okay? I'm fine, Mama. I raised you to be strong, her mother whispered. But you didn't have to be this strong. And smiled. Sometimes, you don't get to choose. That night, Anne sat on her couch, staring at the ceiling. The lights were off. Her badge sat on the table. Kemi came in with hot tea. You should be resting, Kemi said gently. And nodded. You could have yelled at him, Kemi said. And looked at her. What would that change? People need to see you fight back. No, Anne said. They need to see me stand. The next morning, Anne walked into the police station. Every head turned. Some stood quickly. Some looked down. Some whispered. She walked straight to Rivers' desk. He stood up, stiff as a stick. Ma'am, he began. She raised a hand. Don't speak. Just listen. Rivers froze. I'm not here to yell, she said. I'm here to lead. He nodded. You didn't know who I was, she said. No, ma'am. But you knew what you thought I was. Rivers didn't speak. That's the problem, Anne said. And it's going to change. Then she turned and walked away. By the end of the week, the Internal Affairs Department launched an investigation. The city buzzed with questions. Would Rivers be fired? Would Anne press charges? Would this change anything? And just kept doing her job. Focused. Determined. Because she knew something deep. Change doesn't always come from shouting. Sometimes, it comes from standing still while the whole world watches. The city was split. Some people said, she's just trying to embarrass the police. Others said, she handled it like a true leader. But most people just watched the video again and again. Everyone had something to say. Everyone had an opinion. But no one really knew who Anne Hathaway was. They saw her badge. They saw her calm. They saw her power. But they didn't know what it took to get there. And grew up in a tiny house on the south side of the city. A one-bedroom flat with cracked walls, a leaky roof, and a backyard full of old tires. Her mother was a cleaner. Her father, a mechanic. They didn't have much, but they had love. From age 6, Anne walked to school every morning with her backpack full of books and dreams. But the road was never easy. At school, some kids made fun of her skin. Some teachers ignored her hand when she raised it. She was often called too loud, too serious, or too bossy. She cried once. Only once. And her mother said, crying is fine, baby. But after you cry, stand up. And walk taller. And never forgot that. At 17, Anne joined the junior police cadets. She loved the rules. She loved the order. She loved protecting people. But even then, some officers said things behind her back. She's too soft. She only got in because of a diversity program. She's just a token. And heard every word. She never replied. Instead, she worked harder. She ran faster. She studied longer. She stayed later. By age 25, she was already the youngest sergeant in her district. Still, people doubted her. And still, she rose. Back in the city, Rivers Halston sat in the investigation room. He hadn't spoken to the press. He hadn't shown up to work. He just waited. Waited for the punishment. Waited for the shame. Waited for something to fix it all. But it wouldn't be fixed. Because what Rivers didn't know was that Anne wasn't just another name on a badge. She was a symbol now. A message. And the world was watching. One evening, Anne was in her office reviewing files when a knock came. It was the mayor. A short, nervous man in a suit too tight for his belly. He stepped in and said, "Chief Hathaway, may I speak to you?" "Of course," she replied. He sat down slowly. "Listen," he said. "We're under pressure. The media, the protests, the city council." And nodded but said nothing. "We need this to calm down," he continued. "We're asking if you'd be willing to let this go quietly. Don't file charges. Just move on." And sat still for a moment. Then she stood up. She walked to the window and looked outside. Children were playing in the park across the street. Black children. White children. All laughing together. Then she turned to the mayor. "I'm not angry," she said softly. He looked confused. "You're not?" "No," she said. "But I'm tired. Tired of asking to be seen. Tired of needing a badge just to be treated like a human being." The mayor's face tightened. "If I let this go," and said, "what message does that send to those kids down there?" He didn't answer. And folded her arms. "I won't scream. I won't rant. But I won't forget." Later that night, Kemi sat beside Anne in the office. "You okay?" she asked. And nodded. "People are trying to make you look like a troublemaker," Kemi whispered. "Even some of the other officers." "I know," and said, "Do you care?" And smiled gently. "If I cared what they thought, I wouldn't be here." Meanwhile, Rivers Halston sat at home, staring at an old photo. It was him, age 10, with his father. Both smiling in front of a fishing boat. His father had been a cop too. Tough, strict, old-fashioned. He used to say, "Don't trust people who don't look like us." Rivers believed it. He grew up with those words buried in his bones. But now he wasn't sure anymore. 3 days later, and received a letter. It was from Rivers. She read it quietly at her desk. It said, "Dear Chief Hathaway, I messed up. Not just in court but in my head. I saw you and assumed you were a problem. I forgot to see a person. I'm sorry. Not just for the world to hear, but for you to know. If you never forgive me, I understand. But I'm trying to change. Rivers Halston." And stared at the paper for a long time. Then she folded it neatly and placed it in her drawer. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just breathed. At the next police department meeting, Anne stood in front of the whole room. Uniforms filled every seat. Eyes stared at her from all sides. She held the letter in her hand but didn't read it out loud. Instead, she said, "I've been chief for 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks, I've been called names. I've been doubted. I've been dragged." A quiet laugh spread through the room. "But I'm still here," she said. "Not because I want revenge, but because I want change." Then she did something unexpected. She turned to the door and said, "Officer Rivers Halston, please come in." Gasps echoed around the room. Rivers walked in slowly, face low, and looked at everyone and said, "This officer made a mistake. A big one. But he did something most don't." She turned to Rivers. "He apologized. And he's willing to learn." Then she said, "From this day forward, Officer Halston will join the Bias and Respect Training Unit. Not as punishment, but as a start." The meeting ended in silence. Some officers clapped. Some frowned. Some stayed frozen. But Anne walked out of that room taller than before. Kemi caught up with her in the hallway. "You didn't fire him?" And shook her head. "Firing him won't teach him anything." Kemi smiled. "And what if he never changes?" And paused. "Then that's his journey. But I'll be proud of mine." That night, Anne got another call from her mother. I saw the news, her mother said, and chuckled. Of course you did. I'm proud of you, baby. And smiled. But you be careful, her mother warned. The world doesn't always clap for strong black women. I know, and said, but I'm not here for claps. I'm here to clean up. A week later, and walked into another courtroom. Same building. Same hallways. Same courtroom seat. But this time, when she entered, everyone stood. Not out of fear. Not out of shock. But out of respect. She sat in the same front row. Quiet. Focused. And behind her sat Officer Rivers, now in civilian clothes, holding a notepad. Watching. Learning. The courtroom clock ticked again. But this time, nothing was broken. Because one woman chose silence over rage. Grace over noise. Justice over ego. It was early morning. The wind outside was cold, and the sun had just started to rise. Inside the old training room of the police department, the air was stiff and silent. Chairs were arranged in a circle, the walls had posters with big bold letters. Respect is earned, equality matters, see the person, not the stereotype. Rivers Halston stood at the edge of the room, unsure of where to sit. He had come early, maybe too early, but he didn't want to be noticed walking in late. He kept his head low, heart beating fast. Every step felt like he was walking on broken glass. Then she walked in. Chief and Hathaway. She didn't wear her usual police jacket today. She wore a plain gray sweater, simple jeans, and black sneakers. No badge. No shine. Just her presence. It filled the room like sunlight through a window. Rivers looked up for a second. Their eyes met, but only for a moment. She gave a small nod and sat down, just like any other officer. Others started to arrive. Some looked at Rivers and whispered. Others stared openly, as if he didn't belong. And maybe he didn't. Not yet. The trainer, a woman with short curly hair and a bright scarf, clapped her hands to begin. She wasn't a cop. Her name was Ms. Lydia, a professor from the city university, and she was brought in for one reason: truth. Not the kind in reports or courtrooms. The kind that made people uncomfortable. The kind that broke walls. She asked everyone to say their name and something people often assume about them. The room was quiet. Then slowly, one by one, they spoke. My name is Tony. People think I'm dumb because I have tattoos. I'm Maria. They think I can't fight crime because I'm small. I'm Henry. They think I'm angry because I don't smile much. Then it came to Rivers. He cleared his throat. His voice cracked. I'm Rivers. People think I'm racist. No one laughed. No one spoke. Ms. Lydia just nodded and moved on. But she looked at him for a second longer than before. The days went by slowly. Each session brought something new. Source. Videos. Questions. They watched body cam footage of real officers losing control. They read letters from children afraid of the police. They studied reports where assumptions became deadly. And every day, Rivers sat still. He didn't talk much. But he listened. One afternoon, the trainer asked them to do a role play. Each officer had to pretend to be a civilian in a tense situation. Rivers was asked to play a father whose son had been wrongly arrested. He refused at first, then reluctantly stood up. They gave him a script. He read the words. Why are you arresting my son? He didn't do anything. But something shifted as he kept talking. His voice got louder. His face turned red. He threw down the paper. My kid doesn't deserve this, he shouted. Silence. The trainer said gently, now imagine someone spoke to you like that. What would you see? A threat? Or a parent? Rivers sat down, sweating. He didn't answer. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept hearing those words. What would you see? A threat? Or a parent? He thought about the time he arrested a young black boy for riding a bicycle without lights. The boy had cried. Said he didn't have money for new ones. Rivers had still taken him in. Back then it felt right. Now, it just felt heavy. The next day, they talked about personal bias. Each person had to share a moment they judged someone wrongly. One officer spoke about searching a car because the driver looked suspicious. Another talked about ignoring a woman's complaint because she didn't speak good English. Then Rivers spoke. He didn't plan to. The words just came out. There was a woman in court. I didn't know her. I didn't ask her name. I just saw her sitting there and thought, she didn't belong. No one interrupted. She was quiet. Still, I grabbed her arm and pulled her out like she was trash. His voice cracked. She wasn't just someone. She was the chief. My chief. Still no one spoke. I thought I was protecting the courtroom. But I wasn't. I was protecting my prejudice. A long pause. Anne said quietly, "And what would you do if you saw her sitting there today?" Rivers turned to her, eyes wet. I'd ask if she was comfortable. And thank her for showing up. And for the first time, and smiled. The training continued. They were taught about community policing. About listening first, acting second. About how fear isn't always a crime, and silence doesn't mean guilt. One day, they visited a school. It was part of their outreach program. Rivers sat with a group of 8-year-olds. One boy looked up at him and asked, "Are you the man who pulled the chief out of court?" Rivers paused. "Yes, I am." "Why'd you do that?" the boy asked. Rivers looked the boy in the eyes and said, "Because I wasn't thinking right. And I'm learning how to think better now." The boy nodded slowly. "Okay." Then he handed Rivers a drawing. It was a picture of a black woman in a police uniform standing next to a white officer, both smiling. Under it, the boy had written, "We all protect each other." Rivers folded the paper and put it in his pocket. When they returned to the department, Anne was waiting. "How was the school visit?" she asked. Rivers handed her the drawing. She stared at it, then looked at him. He didn't need to explain. That night, as Anne locked her office, she paused outside the building. The city looked different in the dark. Quieter. Slower. She thought about all the people who had whispered behind her back. All the meetings where she was the only black face in the room. All the time she smiled just to survive. But tonight felt different. Because the people who once doubted her were beginning to see her. Not just as a black woman. Not just as a leader. But as someone they could follow. The training ended 2 weeks later. Each officer got a certificate. But that didn't matter to Anne. What mattered was what they carried home in their hearts. Rivers approached her before leaving. "I'm not perfect," he said. "No one is," she replied. "But I'm trying." "I know." He offered his hand. She took it. Not out of pity. Not out of pressure. But out of hope. Hope that even the worst mistake could become the beginning of something better. And watched him walk out the door. Then she sat down, alone, and whispered to herself. It only took 5 seconds to destroy his career. But it took weeks to rebuild his humanity. The room was silent again. But this time, it felt full of something warm. Something growing. Something worth waiting for. It had been 3 months since the courtroom incident. Since that awful, silent moment when Rivers Halston pulled Anne Hathaway out of her seat without asking her name. Since the city gasped. Since the headlines exploded. Since trust broke like glass. But time had moved, and with it so had people. Some wounds still lingered in the air, like smoke after a fire, but something had changed in the hearts of many. Especially in Rivers. Every day he arrived early. Every day he stayed late. He didn't just wear his badge anymore, he carried it with care. Like it could shatter again if mishandled. He joined programs in the neighborhood. He sat in community meetings. He didn't speak unless spoken to. He listened. He watched. He served. But there were still whispers. There were still eyes that followed him with doubt. Some said, "He's only pretending." Others said, "Once a racist, always a racist." But he kept going. Because guilt wasn't what pushed him now, growth was. And watched from a distance. She saw it all. She saw the tired look in his eyes. She saw how he picked up trash after events, helped old women across streets, walked kids home when they were scared. Not because anyone asked, but because no one had. The department had quiet meetings too. About what to do with Officer Halston. Some wanted him fired. Others thought he should be suspended again. A few believed he had learned his lesson. But Anne didn't say anything yet. Instead, she planned something. The city had its big annual ceremony coming. A time when officers were awarded for bravery, kindness, and service. Most people expected a usual speech, a few claps, and some fake smiles. But had something different in mind. On the day of the ceremony, the city hall was full. People of all colors sat side by side. Reporters were everywhere, waiting for something exciting. No one knew what was coming, and stepped onto the stage. The room went still. She looked over the crowd, holding a small note in her hand, but she didn't read it. She looked up and said, "This isn't a usual speech." The lights dimmed. A video started to play. At first, it was just pictures. A black woman dragged from a courtroom. Faces full of shock. A man's hand gripping her arm. The audience murmured. Then came videos. Of Rivers in training. Rivers sitting with school kids. Rivers standing in the rain, helping people during a flood. Rivers hugging a crying boy who had lost his mom. Rivers standing still as an angry crowd shouted at him, and not moving a muscle in return. And then a voice. Rivers, in a quiet interview, said, "I didn't just embarrass myself. I embarrassed the badge. I don't want pity. I want to change. Even if it takes the rest of my life." The video stopped. The room was silent, and returned to the mic. She said, "I was that woman in court. And today, I am the woman on this stage. Some people thought I should have pressed charges. Others thought I should have ruined his life. But I chose something harder. I waited to see who he'd become." She paused. Some men crumble when the world turns on them. But some rise. Not with pride, but with pain and purpose. She looked out over the audience. "Officer Rivers Halston, please come forward." Guess. Some people clapped. Others frowned. But everyone watched. Rivers stood slowly. He looked at and unsure. She nodded. He walked forward. When he reached the stage, he didn't take the mic. He didn't smile. He just whispered, "Thank you," and reached into her pocket and held up a silver pin. Not a badge. Not a medal. Just a small silver heart. "This isn't for being perfect," she said. "It's for starting again." She pinned it to his shirt. The room clapped. Some loud. Some slow. But it came. And Rivers didn't cry. But his eyes were wet. He stepped down, not as a hero, but as a man who was learning how to be one. After the ceremony, people walked up to him. Some shook his hand. Some didn't. But the ones who did? They smiled. Later that night, as Anne packed her things in her office, she heard a knock. It was Rivers. He held a small gift bag. She raised an eyebrow. He chuckled nervously. "It's not much." She opened it slowly. Inside was a picture frame. A drawing. 2 stick figures. One black. One white. Both wearing blue uniforms. Holding hands. She looked at the bottom. It was the same picture the little boy had given Rivers at the school. He had copied it, framed it, and looked up. Rivers said softly, "You gave me a second chance. I wanted you to have this. To remember what that meant." She didn't say anything at first. She just nodded. Then finally she said, "You didn't just end your old career that day. You started a better one." Rivers smiled. "I'll never stop earning it," he said. And he meant it. He left the room. Anne looked at the picture again. She sat down, feeling the weight of all that had happened. All that had changed. It only took 5 seconds to destroy a man's whole career. Not with a gun. Not with a fight. But with a single, silent mistake, made in front of everyone. But it took thousands of seconds, thousands of steps, and thousands of choices to slowly rebuild something better. And in the quiet that followed, Anne whispered to the night. Sometimes the fall is what wakes us up. But it's what we do after that shows who we truly are. The city lights glowed outside. And in one tiny corner of it, a broken badge had become a beating heart again. One mistake can break you, but how you rise after it can define you forever. Always lead with humility, not hate. Please tell us where you are watching from in the comments section. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories like this.